pre-Columbian. And so this is a very generous map that shows Cahokia being, again, very unique. There was agriculture going on here, a little bit of agriculture here. This was corn agriculture and more intensive corn agriculture right on the coast. Most of North America, this was all still hunter-gatherers here. And then this was kind of mixed farming, actually. There was hoe farming or primitive farming in the green area. And so, again, that's what this is, primitive farming. So the idea that this was overturned again is ridiculous. It's a failure of basic research on Lecaque's part. And just to drive the point home, here's a revisionist article from 2015 where someone's trying to argue that in fact indigenous farmers in pre-Columbian North America were much more advanced than they actually were. But this shows you that in 2015 most researchers were arguing that it was shifting cultivators whose agricultural productivity was marginal and unstable, whose actions were damaging to the environment. And then she challenges this assessment. So one person in 2015 challenges the idea that everybody who was farming was a hoe farmer and that was marginal and not very advanced agriculture. So again, that pretty much backs up everything that I said on this point. And then Lecaque is very happy to go personal, which I generally never do. I'm only saying things against him here just because he was like pretty horrible to me and just to prove that he doesn't really have much basis for trying to take me down in such a vile personal way. So he says, I fail to interrogate my sources or use even basic historical methodology. And two immediate instances of this are how I talk about Columbus and then talk about Pocahontas. And of course, being hip or whatever, he uses one of her Indian names, of which there were several. And then taking such a blatantly self-congratulatory account at face value is something we teach students to identify and avoid at the survey level. So Fynn Paul's such a bad historian that he's worse than a basic undergrad. So again, this is basically just nonsense. You know, to people who read this piece, they're very happy to be like, oh yeah, he's a terrible historian. He doesn't even know how to use sources at all. He doesn't even know how to read Christopher Columbus. But I'll just point out a couple of my accomplishments as an historian. For one, I won the European History Quarterly Prize for Best Article of the Year, which this kind of thing happens to so few historians get any prizes like this at all. And so, I mean, here I am winning a major prize for best historical research. So if I can't even interrogate basic historical sources, that's probably not going to happen. And here's a major piece that I had in the Cambridge World History of Slavery. Notice I have the lead-off article on the Greater Mediterranean Slave Trade. If you get in something like the Cambridge World History of Slavery multi-author volume, which is edited by legends such as David Eltis and Stanley Angerman, if you get in something like this, this usually means you're the very top of your field, you're a world-leading authority. And then to get the lead-off article in a thing like this, I mean, come on. That means you're about as respected as they come. And just to give those who don't know me a little bit more of a sense of what I've done as an historian, here's just some of my citations on Google Scholars. So here's a book which I have with 60 citations. Here's another book with 25. Here's an article in Past and Present, the top historical journal by quite a bit. With 140 citations. Here's another book with 20 citations, 19. And here is another article, and this list continues on for several pages. Also, I have a book or an article coming out, a major summary article coming out in the Economic History of the Iberian Peninsula with Cambridge University Press. So all of this stuff, this number of citations for a tiny field like I'm in medieval history is like pretty darn good. Most people end up with 3 or 4 citations if they're lucky. So again, this shows that I'm a global authority in several different fields, including slavery and economic history. So the idea that I have no idea what I'm doing and can't even use basic sources is once again rather silly. So now let's take a look at what Lecaque's been doing while I was publishing that stuff. Here's something that just came out. He had a peer-reviewed article up at Age of Revolutions, which never heard of, but anyway, on indigenous farming practices and settler colonialism. Oh, in video games. Yeah. All right. So he's publishing on settler colonialism and farming practices, his favorite topics in video games. And where is Lecaque located right now? Okay, so I know he got his PhD from the University of Tennessee. Okay, so and then he's at a university in Iowa that has no history department at all, and it's ranked 110th out of 167 regional universities. Okay, yep, there you go. For better, for worse, that's his kind of, that's where he's at. And where am I at? Oh, all right. It looks like my History Institute is rated first in continental Europe and 16th in the world versus 110th, 110th regional in the US. And let's look at Lecaque's publications. So here is his Google Scholar. Okay, he just got his PhD in 2015, so 10 years later than I did. But anyway, his top thing is his dissertation. So his dissertation doesn't seem to have actually been published. It was supposed to be with Routledge, but it looks like it never came out. I'm not sure. His second thing, From Zero to Hero, Nationalistic Narratives and the Dogma of Being Dragonborn. So Dragonborn, I happen to know, is from Skyrim, the video game. So that's his second cited thing. And then here's something again on his dissertation. And Skyrim as a settler colonial text. So again, taking out his sort of liberal anger at, what's it now, a 13-year-old video game? When did Skyrim come out? And then here's the apocalyptic myth that helps explain evangelical support for Trump. So again, typical American liberal preoccupation with Trump as the most evil guy on earth. And that's what we get. And although I blocked him on Twitter because he was being rather abusive to me back in the day, I've seen that he has 120,000 tweets on Twitter right now. So over 10 years, that would be 32 tweets per day, every single day for 10 years. So Lecaque is obviously not spending too much of his time writing history, but he is writing things like Christian nationalists who turn the AR-15 assault rifle into a religious artifact, far-right extremism, Jesus, guns, and babies. So again, it's like finding the fringes of the Republican Party in the US, and there's plenty of wild people in the US, I won't deny that. But he's trying to find, he basically spends his life like a lot of, I think, closeted liberals who spend too much time in their own liberal bubble, thinking that all Republicans are the Antichrist. So I think that's where we're coming from when he was so virulently trying to take me down and capture me in his net, even though, again, I'm not remotely a racist white supremacist, but actually a centrist, as I say in the Spectator article. And so finally, here's a little graph I made of all my little, or a list of all my arguments. I make about 12 different main arguments in the Spectator piece. He addresses about 5 of these. About half of those he agrees with. I mean, he argues that Columbus, you know, I say he wasn't a genocidal maniac. He says, well, actually he was. And then I say Pocahontas actually got along with the English more than you think. And then he said, oh yeah, well, actually you can't believe anything the sources say. So, you know, you could argue that maybe 2 of his arguments kind of stick. So, I mean, if I have 12 arguments, each of those is about 8% of my argument. If you are generous and give him 2 of those, then he maybe debunks about 16% of my article in total. So again, he starts the article saying that I'm a bad historian, incapable of working with sources. These are his main two arguments, and the other one is that I'm far right. So the first one, by saying I'm a bad historian, I think I've proven beyond any doubt that that's kind of absurd for him to say. All of his attempted takedowns of my arguments, the few that he attempts, are basically failures. Now, what is this about being far right? I very plainly state in my article that I'm a centrist, that I don't think that anyone should be excusing the behavior of European colonialists at all. I'm only arguing that there needs to be more balance than what people like Lecaque and his buddies are pushing these days, which is that Europeans were completely evil. And then he attempts to use this idea of white defensiveness that says that any person who's a white person who argues against whatever charge, no matter how untrue, anyone who argues against us is de facto a racist. So if I'm far right, it's because I try to deny anything that he says. So that was his attempt at painting me to be far right, which again is ridiculous. There isn't a single statement in my article that is vaguely far right. So I think that we've kind of proven that his entire hit piece is baseless. And then when you Google me on YouTube, you find that there's at least one person who has used Lecaque's article as an attempt to discredit me and my book that's coming up, and guess who it is? Oh, it's Marxist-Leninist Girl Reviews, who, based on the cover of my book, tells us all that it is trash. And they say that I'm denying genocide. And here she is quoting how bad history feeds far-right fantasies, dangerous revisionism. So again, does she have any arguments? Nope. But does she use Lecaque? Yes. So again, this becomes the basis of a lot of the criticism being leveled at me. But again, with enemies like this, I don't really need friends, I think. So, in conclusion, I think my contention at the beginning that Lecaque's article is literally nothing more than a hit piece, deliberately trying to make somebody or something look bad, presenting information that appears to be true and accurate, but actually is not. A standard attempt at a hit piece by a lazy and biased journalist. I think that pretty much all applies. Thanks very much, and I'll see you in the next video.